Facing there, I mean, you're...
A new report sheds light on the abuses against the LGBT community in Malawi. Ethiopia's parliament swears in the country's first female Supreme Court president. And what can the continent do to solve the problem of chronic power shortages? Africa 54 starts right now.
Welcome, I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin our broadcast tonight with a new report from Human Rights Watch revealing that Malawi's laws prohibiting consensual same-sex relations are fostering a climate of fear and fueling violence and discrimination. The report also says that a punitive legal environment combined with social stigma allows rampant police abuse to go unchecked, preventing many lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people in Malawi from reporting violence or receiving medical care. Human Rights Watch says that a lack of clarity about the legal status of same-sex conduct leaves LGBT people vulnerable to arbitrary arrest, physical violence and routine discrimination. Researchers found a number of cases in which police arrested and detained transgender people and in some cases physically abused them for no reason. The researchers also say some medical professionals denied people services based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, homosexuality became a contentious issue in Malawi in 2009 when two men were arrested and charged with public indecency for getting married in a traditional ceremony. They were later pardoned by the late President Bingu wa Mutharika after pressure from donors and the United Nations. In Malawi, adult consensual same-sex activity is punishable by up to 14 years in prison for men and 5 years for women. Well, in another historic move, the Ethiopian parliament on Thursday swore in the country's first female Supreme Court president, building on efforts by reformist Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to achieve gender parity in government. The appointment of Maiza Ashinafi comes 2 weeks after Abiy named 10 female ministers to make Ethiopia the third country in Africa after Rwanda and Seychelles to have its cabinet split equally between men and women. A prominent rights campaigner, Maiza recently served as an advisor on women's rights at the Addis-based United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. In naming her as her pick to head the Supreme Court, Abiy told lawmakers the court system needed improved capacities to successfully implement demands made with regards to justice, democracy and change in our country. Parliament unanimously approved Abiy's choice and Ethiopia's constitution. The court system operates independent of government. Now, general elections are set to be held in Nigeria on February the 16th, 2019 to elect the president and the National Assembly. Among those who will be closely monitoring the elections will be the International Center for Journalists through its Truth Bars Initiative Fellows. One of them is Hannah Ojo, an award-winning Nigerian journalist who will be based in Abuja ahead of the general election. Hannah joins me now in studio. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
We're happy to have you with us. Now, you are going to be representing Truth Bars in Abuja. First, explain to us what you've been doing just before you got this fellowship.
Yeah, basically, I've been reporting. I work with the Nation newspaper. I'm attached to the features and investigation desk. So I've been writing features, stories on development and social justice issues. And I've been trying to experiment with new storytelling forms, especially, how to engage a younger audience.
Yeah.
So that is one of the things that I'm bringing to bear with this Truth Bars Fellowship.
What exactly would you be expected to do during that time, during the election time with Truth Bars?
With Truth Bars during the election time, because we find a lot of misinformation going on during the election time. So what we'll be doing will be debunking misinformation, especially regarding the election, so that people will be able to make good and informed decisions. Right now, building up to the election, there's been a lot of misinformation on social media with pictures, with text. So what we're doing is to apply technology to debunk this misinformation. And in Nigeria, as you have a large youth population, and you have them on social media, and you see politicians targeting those people with their propaganda, with information that may not be true. So I think a lot of the thing that the Truth Bus Fellowship will be doing is to reach out to that online audience, to debunk information using the social media, and there's a lot even happening on WhatsApp.
Yeah. Now, Hannah, you're operating the same ecosystem as those who peddle falsehoods, who actually churn out fake stories out there. How would you help people to separate between the fake things, the made-up stories, and the real truth, even on that social media platform? Because this is where everybody's operating.
Yeah. The thing is, you have people, you have journalists who are working on separating the falsehood from the truth.
Yeah.
The issue we have is sometimes those falsehoods don't go as far. I mean, sometimes some of this corrected information or the correct information don't go as far as the false news. So what I'll be helping to do is to make sure that this good information go viral. The debunks go viral.
So there's a combination, of course, on the reach, the ability to reach as many people as possible, but also making it kind of be separate from the fake one, because sometimes they look identical. You know, people go on social media and can beautifully craft information in a way that it looks like it is very genuine, it's very authentic. And at the same time, you know, you are trying to separate it on the same medium.
To separate it on the same medium and to show the process, to demonstrate the process. Because if you separate it and you tell them, hey, this is not right, if you're not showing, if you're not demonstrating the process, they won't believe you. So that is one of the things that I will be helping journalists in Abuja to do. You not only show how this information is not correct, you show the medium. If you're using technology, if you're using Google reverse images to demonstrate how a picture is not real, you need to show it. And that is why we're not just going to be doing the traditional reporting. We're going to be engaging technology.
So how do you see the challenge of people not having so much patience to kind of take time to verify things, in that they're quick to just take in whatever comes on their phones or whatever computers and spread it around?
Yeah, because usually misinformation appeals to the emotion. You know, they get to where they know, okay, they can get your emotional responses, and you find people just sharing this information at the speed of light. So one thing we will be doing is you get to them on the platform where the misinformation is shared, and you keep sharing repeatedly. And you try to make emotional connection, even when you publish fact-checking reports.
Wow, yeah, indeed. That's something I didn't think about. Just keep sharing on the same platform until kind of people get an emotional connection with that information.
An emotional connection, so
Thank
that's
you very
important.
much. I wish you well, and we look forward to hearing from you after the exercise, especially.
Yes, thank you so much.
It was a delight having you with us. Well, that's Hannah Ojo, who is a Nigerian award-winning journalist and a Truth Bus Fellow. Back to the continent, opposition leaders from the Engagement for Citizenship and Development Party in the Democratic Republic of Congo are voicing concern over transparency in the upcoming December election. This comes after the Congolese army donated over 150 trucks and a dozen aircraft to the country's electoral body. According to Congo's Electoral Commission, 300 trucks, 10 planes and 10 helicopters will be deployed to distribute material to various parts of the country for the December 23rd polls. However, some opposition leaders have sounded the alarm, saying this is another sign that the country will not be able to hold free and fair elections, especially after Congo's government rejected offers of advice, oversight and election funding from abroad. Doubts about the voting technology is increasing fears that the polls will be marred by chaos. Now, governments worldwide are increasing their control over use of the internet and social media. That's according to the latest report by the Freedom House organization. In 2017, officials in many countries accused dissidents of spreading fake news as a pretext to silence them. Online propaganda and uncontrolled harvesting of personal data have permeated the internet in the past year. A Freedom House expert told VOA these trends are a major threat to democracy. Here's VOA's Zlati Sahuk.
Online content manipulation contributed to a 7th consecutive year of overall decline in internet freedom, says the Freedom House report for 2017. China was the world's worst abuser of internet freedom for the 3rd consecutive year. Citizens of Iceland and Estonia enjoy the most internet freedom. Turkey is one of the countries that have seen a steep decline in internet freedom following the 2016 failed coup against President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Internet use is strictly censored.
And we've seen in the past few years how a refusal to abide by Turkish court orders to remove certain content has resulted in these platforms being blocked.
The report also says manipulation and disinformation tactics played an important role in elections in 18 countries last year. In the United States, proliferation of fake news peaked ahead of the 2016 presidential election and continues to be a concern.
Unfortunately, this year really underlined the notion that the internet can disrupt democracies as much as it can destabilize dictatorships.
Freedom House is calling for the support of independent journalists who can help investigate how social media are being weaponized to silence legitimate reporting.
We've seen some really great efforts in places like the United States in order to identify who is behind disinformation campaigns around electoral interference or to smear certain journalists.
The Russian government has been named as one of the top purveyors of fake news in an attempt to influence political developments abroad and to maintain hold on power at home. Zlarica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and what we cover, the stories we cover. Now, join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa54, combating the continent's chronic power shortages. But first, a look at Thursday's headlines.
Displaced person. Libya is attempting to curb the influence of the black market by requiring the central bank to require mandatory cards for foreign currency transaction. In South Africa, the Associated Press has found that more than 56,000 migrants traveling to find a better lifestyle in other parts of Africa were buried 5 to a grave in a South African cemetery. The Islamic Movement of Nigeria says nearly 50 of its members were killed in clashes with Nigerian security forces, in contrast to the military's death toll of 6. In the DRC, leaders of opposition ACID party are concerned about transparency in the December election after the Congolese army distributed political material.
Well, Sub-Saharan Africa is facing chronic power problems, including insufficient generation capacity, low connectivity, poor reliability, and a high cost, of all of which constrain development. Now, according to a World Bank report, 1 in 3 Africans does not have access to electricity, often resorting to using kerosene or spending hours in darkness. On the other hand, power providers in the region are cash-strapped, suffer from aging infrastructure, and are unable to serve their customers in a reliable manner. If nothing is done to change this, there will be more Africans without power by 2030 than there are now. Now, what are Africans doing to mitigate these challenges? DLO Energy is a South African woman-owned power developer currently operating one of Africa's largest wind farms and expanding its portfolio across Africa. To tell us more about it, I'm joined from London by Linda Mabena Olagunju, the founder and director of DLO Energy. Ms. Mabena Olagunju, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, now you see the power thing is really a big issue across the continent of Africa. It looks like you're coming in with revolutionary ideas. Share with us what exactly you set out to do and what you're doing at the moment.
Well, our objective as a company is to be one of the largest black African women-owned energy developers on the continent. We started off building our portfolio in South Africa. We currently own a 244 megawatt wind farm, which is operational. We also own a solar PV plant, which is awaiting financial close. and we have been shortlisted for a variety of projects across the continent in countries such as Botswana as well as Nigeria. Our objective is to continue to grow the portfolio so that we can put more power on the grid and light up Africa.
Now, you know, when people think of power in Africa, for decades people thought about hydroelectric power, but it looks like you're looking elsewhere. Why was that your choice, and why should everybody be thinking that way?
Well, it's important to keep in mind climate change whenever we talk about the production of electricity. And clean energy was a space I thought was environmentally responsible, but not only environmentally responsible, it was cost effective for governments and for consumers, and we were able to put the power up in shorter construction periods versus coal or other fossil-based technologies. So the lead time for a renewable energy project is much shorter. So we're able to bring power to people in a shorter time, and that's important. Shorter time periods and affordable power.
What are some of the challenges that you face as you try to achieve your objective, not only in South Africa, but across the continent?
I think it's clear that regulatory policy clarity is very, very important for any investor. We need to know the rules of the game in order for us to be able to invest rapidly. We need to know how much government will want in terms of megawatts, and we need to know when they will want it. And we also need to know how we will fund these projects. So the consistent issue in Africa is that sometimes you have a good program like in South Africa and then it stops and starts again, or you don't have a program at all in other countries like Botswana, Nigeria, even Kenya at some point, and you then have to enter into lengthy negotiations with governments. So I think a uniform program that is government-led and government-guaranteed would see more projects coming off the ground in Africa.
Now, sometimes people see a lot of government in some of these infrastructures and the big projects like power plants. What is the best way? I mean, would you say that perhaps a private sector driven power initiatives would be more effective, or is it perhaps a partnership between the two, the private sector and the government?
I think government still has an important role to play. We need to also understand that electricity is a social matter. It's a need that government has to provide to its people. So we also need to be careful about outsourcing the entire value chain to the private sector, because then it would mean the poor would be left with the government infrastructure. I think it's about finding a balance between private sector involvement as well as government involvement, but I think effectively government is there to create an enabling environment for investment.
Very quickly, how do we make sure our people, especially in the extreme distant rural areas, can access this power even as you work hard to generate it? How do they get it given the kind of infrastructure you have across the continent?
So the reality is that we're not going to connect everyone in Africa using the grid. Therefore, it's important to have a combination of solutions, grid power as well as off-grid power. So sometimes you find that a person just needs to charge their phone or switch on a light or, cook. So you have these home solar systems, which I think are more effective for the rural areas and more cost effective as well for governments who are trying to electrify remote areas. It's also important to see the role of mini grids as well as off-grid systems. So the issue there is underinvestment due to the fact that the returns are not great for private sector. They do require government subsidy. So I think therein lies a great opportunity for that public-private partnership that is required to propel the continent forward in terms of power and in terms of rural electrification.
Well, Ms. Mabena Olagunju, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's Linda Mabena Olagunju, who's the founder and managing director of DLO Energy, a South African-owned power developer. Now, in a stunning revelation, a Turkish prosecutor says the Saudi dissident Jamal Khashoggi was killed by strangulation immediately after entering Riyadh's consulate in Istanbul before his body was cut into pieces. The statement by Chief Istanbul Prosecutor Ehren McMichael comes as Turkey pressures Saudi Arabia to extradite the 18 people detained in connection with Khashoggi's killing. Khashoggi had gone into the Saudi consulate in the Turkish capital on October 2nd to obtain paperwork he needed for his planned marriage to Turkish national Hatice Cengiz, who waited for him outside the consulate. He was never seen again. Turkish President Recep Erdogan has requested Saudi officials identify an alleged local collaborator suspected of disposing of Khashoggi's body. The man accused of gunning down 11 worshippers in a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania synagogue and wounding 6 other people, including police, has pleaded not guilty on Thursday to a 44-count indictment, including charges of hate crimes during an arraignment in federal court. Authorities say 46-year-old Robert Bauer of Pittsburgh burst into the Tree of Life synagogue Saturday shouting, "All Jews must die," and opened fire. The shooting is one of the worst attacks on the Jewish community in U.S. history. At a Florida rally Wednesday night, U.S. President Donald Trump criticized media coverage of his visit to Pittsburgh this week. Actually, it seems some of the anger preceded media coverage of Trump's visit as protesters demonstrated in the streets before and during Trump's visit, contending that his rhetoric helped fuel the gunman's anti-Semitism and anti-immigrant views against a Jewish group that aids refugees arriving in the U.S. from overseas. Funeral services for 3 more of synagogue shooting victims were held on Wednesday. Most people with rather cold-like symptoms. Now, they don't realize the flu can lead to life-threatening complications. Last year was a particularly bad flu season in the Northern Hemisphere. Close to 80,000 people died in the U.S., including 180 children. Already this year, a child in Florida has died from the flu. A hospital there did some research and found a significant number of parents are concerned about the safety and effectiveness of the flu vaccine. VOA's Carol Pearson has the details.
Careful, Hannah.
Kids are very effective spreaders of disease. Just ask Ehren McMichael.
My husband and I just assume if one kid gets it, it's do the best you can and then hope for the best, because more than likely somebody else in the house will come down with it as well.
Even though kids don't like getting a shot, these kids know why they get one.
All right.
It's better to get a shot than get sick. It helps protect you from the flu, and so when you go to school, your friends don't catch it.
A Florida hospital surveyed parents and found a significant number of parents are misinformed about the vaccine.
Doctors recommend the flu vaccine because we know, based on science and research and facts, that it is the best way to protect yourself and your family against the flu.
The survey found a third of the parents questioned don't think the vaccine works. More than half said children can get the flu from the shot, which is not true.
The parts of the virus that are used are completely dead, so you cannot get the flu from the flu shot.
The survey also found about 28% of parents believe the flu shot can cause autism.
We know that the flu vaccine is safe. You cannot get the flu from the flu vaccine. You cannot get autism from the flu vaccine. It is not a conspiracy for doctors to recommend the flu vaccine.
Scientists try to figure out what strains of flu are likely to circulate in a given year. But even if they guess wrong, the vaccine still offers some protection.
When your body receives the flu vaccine, your body starts to think, okay, I've got to start making antibodies to help protect against the flu virus. So even if it's not a perfect match, getting the flu vaccine will still give your body some protection.
Infectious disease experts recommend getting vaccinated before the flu season begins.
Tell me where I need to hold it.
This goes for adults as well. It protects the people who get vaccinated, as well as babies who are too young to get the vaccine. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
The Democratic campaign promises of Medicare for all are resonating with some American voters who cite the rising cost of health care as a top issue in the upcoming U.S. midterm elections. That's despite concerns over possible tax increases to fund a universal health care program. Here's VOA's Brian Padden.
A number of Democrats running for office this year, like New York congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are advocating for national health care legislation proposed by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders who lost the 2016 Democratic nomination for president to Hillary Clinton. Sanders' plan would expand Medicare, a government-funded health care program for senior citizens, to cover all Americans. Other Democratic contenders like Beto O'Rourke, a candidate for the Senate in Texas, support increased federal regulation to hold down costs, but are not calling for a complete government health care takeover.
The thing that is common among these different reforms is the structure of a government-administered insurance plan that really controls or limits in some respect the payment rates that are paid to healthcare providers.
Republicans successfully ran against the Affordable Care Act, sometimes called Obamacare. The GOP rallied against it as a big government attempt to take over the healthcare industry to gain control of Congress during former President Barack Obama's time in office. After failing to repeal Obamacare and with healthcare costs rising, some Republicans now say they support a major tenet of the Affordable Care Act to protect people with pre-existing conditions, such as heart disease, diabetes, or cancer. Critics say their sudden conversion to support this issue is suspect. 4 conservative-leaning states will also hold ballot initiatives to vote on expanding Medicaid coverage for the poor, a benefit offered under Obamacare, 90% of funding coming from the federal government. Republicans argue that public support for universal health care will decrease significantly when confronted with the prospect of increased taxes and the rationing of coverage that would likely result from a national health insurance plan.
This is all what happens when you have the government controlling health care costs, because now it's a singular, consolidated entity making decisions on behalf of 300 million Americans.
Even if Democrats make significant gains in Tuesday's election, it is likely they will not have the votes to pass major health care legislation. But the election momentum could increase support for a compromised approach to regulate costs, but also foster private sector competition. Brian Patton, VOA News, Washington.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, a food technology lab says it's developing lab-grown chicken nuggets that do not involve slaughtering chickens. Chicken stem cells are combined with plant-based proteins from sources like mung beans to help create a taste similar to chicken. One of the biggest challenges San Francisco-based Just Food faces right now is making a lab-grown chicken affordable. It currently costs about $100 to create a pound of the meat, but the company's CEO claims that when they ramp up production, the nuggets will eventually be just as affordable as regular chicken. Well, and that's what's trending today. That's our show for today. We just want to ask you to be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at viewafrica.com. For more news, tune in to Viewers Evening Radio Show Africa News tonight at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. So, you know what happy is, and medium comes between small and large.
To find a happy medium.
So, is this idiom about feeling kind of happy?
How is it going with your neighbor? Is he still complaining about your playing the trombone at night?
He was, but it's fine now.
How did you guys work it out?